Alright guys, bad booktuber checking in because it's been forever since I've updated you guys. It is the 19th of February. I have only filmed a clip for the very first book that I read in the month of January, so here we go. And this is a reminder that I should really do these things in a timely manner because I don't remember much about some of these. So we will see whether I have anything interesting to say, but I'm not making any promises. Hey guys, so I need to interrupt myself here because I lost the footage of me talking about the first book that I read in the month of January, which is a real shame because at this point in time, I gotta be honest, we're like 2 months further. This is the 3rd of March, I think, at the point at which I'm filming this. I've forgotten so much about that book, so I'm really gonna rely on my Goodreads review, and my Goodreads review is super vague because the book that I'm going to talk about is The Secret Project #1 by Brandon Sanderson. So this is part of his year with Sanderson. He will be coming out with 4 different secret books throughout this year. If you don't want to know anything about it, then you don't know anything about it, which is the way that I went in, and it's also the way that I'm going to be talking about this book, so that if people are, not the type of people who want to immediately read these books but who still want to be kept in the dark, then you can still listen to my review for it. I'm basically gonna say nothing about the title, the plot, or anything like that, so it is going to be the most vague review you've ever heard from me, but here we go. It is for me gonna be a 3.5 or 3 stars, but that is actually positive for me because I was kind of dreading going into this book because I've not had great experiences with Brandon Sanderson over the past year or so. I've loved most of Brandon Sanderson's works, and I've definitely I felt like he was my favorite author for a very long time, but then the last, I don't know, 3 books or something that I consumed by him, I just felt disappointed. Some of them I wished I'd had DNF'd instead of continuing on with, and so when The Lost Metal came out, for example, I had 0 interest in continuing with it. I still have that one lying around unread, but my overall okay experience with this book means that perhaps I will go into The Lost Metal with less trepidation at this point in time. So I over-enjoyed my time with this one, but there are still some things that that's brought my experience down a little bit. In terms of the positives, this one is really entertaining. I loved a lot of its messaging. I very much appreciated a lot of the representation as well, specifically then disability representation. In terms of the negatives, however, that, to be fair, is a really personal point, but the narration is not perfect to me. Brandon Sanderson in this one tries something different with his narration. It's very different from the narration that we typically see from him. This one has a lot more polish to it. There's a lot more thought going into the specific words that are chosen throughout his narration than is typically the case. A lot of people often criticize Brandon Sanderson for his writing because his writing is so bare basics. And in this one, he definitely goes for a much more sort of I wouldn't really necessarily go flowery, but it's definitely a much more polished narration because of the choice of the narrator. And while that vibe personally already is not something for me, I've seen a lot of people describe it to The Princess Bride. I think Brandon Sanderson at the end of his book also referred to it as being kind of his take on that sort of Princess Bride, Neil Gaiman type of narration, and I do not get along with Neil Gaiman's writing, so that also makes sense why that would be my negative about this book, because that just really is not my vibe in terms of writing. So that is something that I kind of struggled with at times. Plus I also sometimes felt like it wasn't fully there, it's clearly not his typical writing style, and he's trying to, and in parts being successful with that, but sometimes it felt a little bit too, it felt like it needed a little bit of an editing touch to it. It didn't always come off. It didn't always work out the way that it was intended, I feel like. Secondly, there is also the fact that I just feel like Brandon Sanderson has, because Brandon Sanderson at this point in time is so close to his fandom, or to the like extreme fans that he has. He is doing all of these weekly updates, he does a lot of live streams, he explains a lot of things about the Cosmere in those settings. I feel like he's kind of forgetting about the fact that not every one of his readers will be going into those things. Not every one of his readers is invested enough to watch all of that bonus content to find out extra things about the Cosmere and the way that the magic systems works and things like that. And so I kind of feel like within this book he didn't really bother explaining the magic, explaining the Cosmere connections. And of course a lot of these Cosmere connections are kind of Easter eggs, the way that we saw in Rhythm of War, and that's perfectly fine. But when it comes to explaining the way that the magic system works in this particular instance, in this particular world that he's just introduced, I felt like he put zero effort into trying to do that, which is sad because one of the things that I enjoy the most about Brandon Sanderson and his world building in terms of the magic system is how well he's able to explain the magic. Typically he's very much able to explain this magic that is based on science, real world science, and he's very much able to make that comprehensible to a layman, make that something that somebody with zero scientific background or scientific information is able to kind of catch up to how he has made that work in his world. And with this one I feel like he's not bothering anymore. He's like, yeah, sure, this works the exact same way as it works in some of my other books, so surely people will catch on, and I just felt a little bit lost. But so yeah, overall I had a good time with this one. As I said, the narration style, I would kind of go back and forth on that, like at times be like, oh wow, that's like a beautiful way to describe this, that's a beautiful way to put that into words, and then the next moment I'd feel like it was super gimmicky, which is linked to the narrator and to some of the plot points, so I'm not gonna go into that. But yeah, I had a good time with it, and it was much needed because, you know, I needed a win with Brandon Sanderson, but the fact that I'm considering a 3-star a win means that we had sunk very low when it comes to my appreciation of Brandon Sanderson's recent work. The next book that I finished was The Glamourist by Luann G. Smith. This is the second book in a trilogy. I have the third book as an arc. I did not realize it was a third book when I requested it, and I originally thought that the books were sort of like companions, and so that I could kind of read them without, like, read that arc without having read the first two. But then when I saw that the first two were on script, I was like, okay, let's just go ahead. And now I realize they're not really companions. They're kind of companions, but they do definitely follow along on one another. So in the first book we're introduced to this witch called Elena, who for the past 7 years or something like that has been trapped in the body of a toad, I believe, because of a curse. So she has just managed to transform back. She goes back to the vineyard that she grew up in and finds that a lot of things have changed and that she needs to kind of fight to regain the place that she once called home. Now, I enjoyed the first one quite a bit, but it was also not really anything spectacular or anything that really like caught my attention or won over my heart or anything like that. And the second one actually was a little bit more downhill for me. I enjoyed it less than I enjoyed the first one. I didn't really have much of a sense of an intrigue when it came to the second one. I had less like investment in the stakes of the story, and so I overall kind of struggled with the second one to get through it, even though in principle it's pretty damn light-hearted and plot heavy, but I really just wasn't invested, and so that really took my pacing down. So I am also not really looking forward to the third book as a consequence. And each book, while it's not really a companion, it does seem to be like focusing in on a specific character, and the character that we're looking to for the third one to some extent is the one that we know the least about, so perhaps I can be pleasantly surprised, but it's also not really a character that I've really spent much of my time questioning their backstories, but so that does mean that perhaps I will have a pleasant surprise with that experience. The next book that I then finished was specifically for the Be Sure-a-thon by Sasha from the channel The Wild Sasha, and that is Down Amongst the Sticks and Bones by Shauna Maguire. Be Sure-a-thon is a Wayward Children series inspired readathon, so this is the series, this book is a book within that series, and it's all about reading portal fantasy, which of course this book is. Now, Down Amongst the Sticks and Bones is better better than Every Heart a Doorway, in my opinion. It's just a book better suited to me as a reader, because in Every Heart a Doorway we look at a character who has returned from a portal fantasy world and who's trying to deal with the loss of that sense of belonging that she felt while living in that particular world. And so it's a book in which we never really visit the portal world, we only hear about her experiences there. Whereas in this second book we are looking at different characters, characters who we have been introduced to within the first series, and we are really following them into the portal fantasy world. However, ironically enough, I guess, the section that I enjoyed the most of this book is actually before they go into the portal world. What I enjoyed most of here was the introduction into their childhood, the way that their parents saw them. I thought that that section was written really well and compellingly. However, when we then got to the portal fantasy world, I didn't care as much. I was once again not really invested in what was taking place there. And so it's an easy one to get through, and I will continue kind of going through the series, one book a year, every time during Beshurathon, but it's not really a series that at this point in time I have much investment in, or that is really resounding very well with me as a reader, sadly. Next up we get to one of the big book actually for the month of January, I assume, and that is Kushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey. So this is the first book in a very big universe, the Kushiel universe. I think there are 9 books out at this point in time. A 10th book is going to come out, which is basically the story of this first book told from a different perspective. So in this one we're looking at Phaedra, and Phaedra is this young girl who has a particular blemish in her eye, which is then recognized as being a sign that she belongs to this god of pain and pleasure called Kushiel. And so she is trained to become a sort of like courtesan, but not more just a courtesan. She's trained to be able to be a spy at the same time as well, to be able to understand court intrigue and then use her sort of like wiles to get information that might be of interest to her current master. Now this book is much more than what I just said it was, and that is one of the things that I really enjoyed about this a whole lot. So first of all, I really enjoyed the writing style, though the writing style didn't always fully work for me. Sometimes it just went too into the details, too much description, where I wished it would have just like edited it down a little bit, especially towards the ending. I was kind of feeling over it, like I was kind of waiting for the story to round up, because I felt like it just kept on going further and further and further and adding more and more plot lines, where I felt like, you know, I'm ready for this first novel in any case to be rounded out. But in general, I really enjoyed this one a whole lot, and I enjoyed how it just kept on expanding its stakes, where initially I had an idea about, you know, what type of story this would be. That ended up being completely shifted around like midway through or something, and I actually started enjoying it more midway through, whereas I know that there are other readers who enjoyed the first half more, so it kind of depends on that, I guess, whether you will enjoy this book or not, because midway through it shifts quite dramatically, and I really appreciated where it was taking things. And there is a character in this one that I just absolutely fell in love with as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one a whole lot. It is not like a full-blown success. It didn't fully take over my heart or something like that, so it is a 4-star, not a 5-star, but I'm very much eager to continue on with the series and see what else is in store. Next up we have The Daughters of Izdihar by Hadir Elsbay, and this is definitely a book that I feel like I had much more interesting things to say about it when I first finished it, and now a lot of it has already gone hazy, which is a bad sign, of course, I guess. But this definitely is an interesting one. I definitely enjoyed it a whole lot while reading it. I think I listened to it, but I would not really recommend it. I did not appreciate, like, I didn't really enjoy the narration. It was just an easy way to get through the story while also being able to do other stuff at the same time. So in The Daughters of Izdihar we are mainly following two female characters. They are on opposite parts of the economic scale. One of them is part of the upper class, and even though her family is in sort of like financial difficulties, or basically financially they're not as solid anymore as they have been in the past, she definitely still has that prestige of her name, that prestige that can end up earning her high position in society. And the other one is a young girl from a poor family. She's basically working to help maintain her family life, but in secret she's also part of this sort of rebellion group, the Daughters of Izdihar, who are fighting for more equal treatment of women. Now the link between both of these girls will be a male character who one of them is in love with and the other one ends up being arranged to be wed to. Is this the correct grammar? Is this correct grammar? She's arranged to be married to him, and that dynamic I found actually to be very interesting, and in total I really enjoyed the world building and the topics that were discussed. But I must say that, as I said, my experience with this book has become quite hazy, so as a result I think it's probably more middle of the road of an experience for me, where I enjoyed this book and I appreciated it while reading it, but it's one that clearly has not left a lasting impression, sadly. The next book that I finished is an arc. I will be filming a separate video for this one as well, as I do for most of my arcs. This is Feed Them Silence by Lee Mandello. This is a sci-fi novel in which we're basically looking at research going into the neural pathways of wolves. So our protagonist is a researcher who from a young age onwards has had a real kinship with wolves. She's always wondered what it would be like to be a wolf, and she's also dedicated her academic career to finding that out. And so she's just gotten approval for a research into the brains of wolves, and so she has had like, basically she and a wolf have had some sort of an implant that will now allow for them to be linked and for her to experience what it's like to be a wolf and to live amongst a pack. And the further we get through the story, the more that this starts to influence her behavior as well as the relationships that she has with the people around her, in particular with her wife, who has some ethical objections to this research. And as we get further into the book, she also on her side starts to think more and more about the impact on her wolves and the impact that her research and what comes out of that research might potentially have for the subjects that she so dearly loves. So I thought it was interesting in its concept and in its thematics, what it was trying to talk about. However, it didn't fully pan out for me neither. I thought I would have liked it to go a little bit darker potentially. It like had a lot of not really intrigue, I guess. It had some sort of like suspense to this and unease to it, where you were feeling like things were going on under the surface that were sinister and that were potentially gonna create huge problems, but that aspect of things didn't go as far as I would have liked it to go. What ended up being the part that mainly interested me and that I found most enjoyable was the relationship between these two women and the difficulties there in the communication, but also the way in which that relationship was developed, explored, worked on throughout this book. But just overall I just expected us to dive a little bit further into these thematics, whereas now I feel like it's very much left open for debate, which is a positive, of course, for the reader to make up their own mind. But I would have enjoyed us to explore the thematics maybe a little bit more openly in this particular case. And then the final book that I finished in January, I believe. Yeah. The final one that I finished is Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. So this is a book that was also shortlisted for the Women's Prize, and I believe it was also on the Booker Prize longlist or shortlist, not entirely sure. In this one we're looking at a woman who basically has been dealing with what we shall call depression all of her life. Later on she does get a sort of diagnosis as well, which is never really specified within this book because it is kind of made up. It is not meant to reflect one specific condition. It's meant to reflect the struggle of someone with a mental health condition, and the struggles that she faces on a daily basis in both just getting through the day and in her relationships with the people around her, the people who are supporting her through this. And I enjoyed this one. I also thought it was really compelling and really, you know, funny in parts considering the subject matter. I definitely thought this one was going to be like super heavy and depressing to read through, and it definitely wasn't the case. This was one that I kind of flew through as well, that just really surprised me. And I also felt like the authorial voice was really compelling and really made this a very enjoyable experience to go through. But there is not much of a plot to talk about neither. But it is also definitely a sort of book where I had a great experience with it, but it's not a book that will stay with me afterwards. Yeah, so overall a decent month, like no real standouts to this month, no real books that I absolutely fell in love with, but also like quite a few decent books and quite some pages still read, because as you may know, my goal this year is balance, and so I haven't actually been prioritizing reading as much as I would do in other years, or in other months, yeah, in other years actually. And so yeah, I'm actually quite happy with the results so far. In terms of my TBR, I'm actually not entirely sure anymore where I landed at the end of January, and nor do I know whether I actually wrote that down somewhere, because that would have been useful, of course, to do it. I think I took a picture of it and I just deleted it like 50 minutes ago or something. But so in terms of my physical TBR, I don't think I finished a physical book so far this month in February, so that makes it a little bit easier. Then, so is this then the count? Did I finish a physical book? Is it 22? Editing me can figure that out. I think it's 22 that I ended up on, but something in me wants to say 24, and then I've just reduced it already this month, but cannot for the life of... Yeah, I did reduce it by one book at least, so 23 maybe. Whatever, it'll be on the screen. So with that, I'm gonna round up my January reading wrap up. The month of January is, as I said, reading wise okay, but content wise it also marked a moment in which I just all of a sudden was in a little bit of a creator slump, let's say, and I'm hoping that this marks me being out of it, but we will see. But so yeah, see you guys for my next video. Bye!